Okay, Letitia, thank you for agreeing to participate. And we're going to start off with a little bit of background to give this interview some context. So, can you tell me, where were your parents born?
My father was born in Talladega, Alabama.
Hmm.
My mother was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, but she grew up, her younger years were spent in Arkansas, Dermot,
Hmm.
Arkansas, and then she moved to St. Louis with her parents, with
Very
her
good.
mother.
Well, I lived in the southern U.S. for quite a period of time. We can have that discussion afterwards. Where were you born?
I was born in Anderson, Indiana. That's where I grew up. And during my younger years, I guess in the 70s, I'm dating myself, that was, Anderson was the county seat for Madison County. About 20 minutes down the road was a little village called Elwood, Indiana. And at that time, it was, for a certain period during my youth, it was the national headquarters for the KKK.
Wow, really? Holy moly.
They have
That's
a postcard.
that's a whole other discussion we could have,
Yeah.
but,
Well,
uh,
no, it's actually going to be quite relevant to this interview and some of your upcoming questions.
okay, very good.
But yeah, it's a place that yeah, even now dealing with the after effects.
Yes, I'm sure, I'm sure. Now, where did you receive your education? Elementary, secondary, any post-secondary?
I went to elementary school and high school in Anderson, Indiana. And then I went to undergraduate. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Michigan, as well as my law school. But I always felt kind of that where I came from was kind of small and wanted to get out and see the world. So I made a point my senior year of undergrad, I studied for a semester in Rome, Italy, for a classics program. And then in grad school, I I went overseas a couple different times. So I did an internship at the United Nations. At that time, it was called the Commission for Human Rights in
Mhm.
Geneva, and I did a semester there. Did a law program in Italy, again in Siena, one summer, and also spent some time on an internship in Munich, Germany.
Okay, and what is your occupation now, and what have been your occupations throughout the years?
Well, I was a teacher for a while in Puerto Rico. So I always say I've lived in 5 countries and a Caribbean island in addition to my home country. And I've been a teacher. I've been employed as a teacher. I've been a research director and investigator in a prosecutor's office in my hometown. And uh, I worked for several years, went back to Geneva and worked at the World Health Organization as a legal specialist in the HR department. Since coming to Canada, have guess encountered various obstacles, but I'm just recently starting as a program officer, part-time for the federal government. And most of what I'm most proud of, I guess, over the last few years is that I've been involved in education. Even as a program officer, I'll be in the education sphere. But I've been a commissioner. I'm in fact the first Black commissioner on the Council of Commissioners for the Western Quebec School Board in its history, and have been involved at various levels, governing board, parents committee, um, and the Special Education Advisory Committee. So I've been trying to make a contribution.
Good for you. And where do you live now?
Gatineau, Quebec,
Okay,
Gatineau sector.
okay, very good. Now we're going to get into the section concerning your experience living in Quebec. So the first question I'd like to ask is, in your experience, what is the best thing about living in Quebec?
I I read that question and I'm glad I had it in advance. I had to think a little bit. I think there's some beautiful country here and beautiful landscapes. And having lived in various places in the world, that's one of the things that I kind of notice about the places that I've lived, how beautiful they are. And I've met um, some really good and generous people, most of whom are most of whom are actually Indigenous or not from Quebec. There are some exceptions to that, but that's
Okay.
what I've enjoyed most.
Okay, good. Now, this might be a little bit of a difficult question. It seems to be difficult for people to do. Describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
Fraught.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Now, where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language, culture, profession, or geographic location?
None of the above. I would have to say that I feel most at home in certain individual relationships. If we're talking about like sort of feeling accepted and comfortable in my skin, it's in individual relationships. But to be fair, I've met some older women who are Americans. They married Canadian men, and they I asked them, they've lived here 40 years in some instances, and raised their families and whole 9 yards. And I asked them, I said, because we immigrated here in 2004. And I guess I was maybe about 5-6 years in. And I asked them, I said, when does it start to feel like home? And two different women said to me, never.
Wow.
And they don't live in Quebec.
Right.
So,
Well, the next question is again kind of a difficult one. The first one, the first part of this question is relatively simple because it's based on your own experience. But the second part, what I refer to as the official definition of a Quebecer. When I say official, and I put it in quotation marks, I mean, there's many so-called official definition, depending on who you talk to, be it the government's definition, your peers' definition, etc. But what I want to know, first of all, is how would you define a Quebecer? And do you think the official definition, and again in quotation mark, whatever you perceive that to be, includes you?
so this is really interesting because I think it kind of, jumps a little bit around one of your other questions. Before we came here, my husband and I immigrated here from Quebec, actually from Switzerland. And I was pregnant, so I kind of was home for a while in Indiana, but we applied directly from Geneva. And this is because the government at the time, I always enjoy telling people about it, the Quebec government at the time was going around the world recruiting francophones because apparently you all are not making enough babies.
Yes, I remember.
Keep the keep the balance of power.
Yeah.
So we were all we were very excited about coming and so forth. And Switzerland, in case you don't know, has 4 official languages. My husband comes from the Democratic. He was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have 5 official languages, one of which is French, and that is the language of all the scholarity. Children start at school and kindergarten and have to learn French and the subject matter, whatever they're being taught. So we deliberately chose to come here to Quebec and in this National Capital Region because we thought we were so enthusiastic about the idea that this was going to reflect our family. I'm Anglophone, he's Francophone. We were going to raise our children to be bilingual and the whole 9 yards. So we thought, oh yeah, this will be great. And there's 2 official languages. How hard can that be? We've come from a place, and to be fair, Switzerland has been at it for 500 years. So they're a bit ahead of you on the curve of blending everyone together. And yet we were told, just as we were about to leave Switzerland, there was a young couple that I was coming back from Quebec, having immigrated to Quebec City from Geneva, and they said, don't go, do not go. It is people, it doesn't matter how good your French is, because of course their French was impeccable. It's really an insider-outsider game. And if you are not, and this was the first time I heard the phrase, if you are not Québécois de souche, you will have a hard time finding a job. You will have a hard time integrating socially. It's going to be difficult for you. And they were both white. This couple was a white couple. So we ignored them and came anyway. And then my husband had contacts in his community from who were Congolese in Montreal. We landed in Montreal, and we then decided to move to this area. But while in Montreal, we were meeting different people that he knew, or he knew their families, and some of them had gone to school here, had gone to university here. They were trying to raise up when they were like not able to find work. So for instance, one who had a degree in engineering, he was an engineer, brilliant, graduated top of his class. I forget which university he went to. But because he had in engineering, there's a professional order, and you have to have, it's not a stage, it's but you have to work in the field under the sponsorship of an established professional, in his case, an engineer. He was not able to get anyone to accept him. Now, he ticked off all the boxes that we were told before we left, when we were interviewed in Paris and when we landed in Montreal. We were told, some of the obstacles you're going to, encounter are, having your credentials accepted. People are partial to universities here in Quebec. The language for me, speaking French, that sort of thing. But these people ticked all those boxes.
Right.
They had been here for years. They had gone to university and graduated from here. They had, their French was impeccable. What was the problem? And from that experience, another good friend who went to Chicoutimi, the University of Chicoutimi, she got a business degree. Another young man that we met who was a plumber. But in each one of these cases, they needed to kind of have that network. And so, there's a lot of places in the world where it doesn't matter what you know, it matters who you know. But it was particularly galling to my friend who graduated from the University of Quebec at Chicoutimi, who said when she was starting to be turned down for jobs because she didn't speak English well enough, and she was applying for jobs in the municipality of Montreal, that was kind of a lot. It was like, what excuse are you going to come up with next? So anyway, it was, I would say, for me, being, who's a Quebecer, anybody but me. And I think that when you talk about official definitions, I mean, I think the current government is defining, is making, is dividing, not really defining people. And it's what in my experience it's all about finding a reason for you not to belong, to define you as not belonging. And the assumption is always, and I'm not the only, I'm not the only person of color who I've spoken to, because I always check myself, it's like, I don't assume that, I'm perceiving things or experiencing things, or, like maybe it's me, maybe it's not, it's not what I think it is.
Well, that's human nature, right?
Yeah, but the idea has, the experience has been that I have been assumed to be a foreigner. Before anyone ever even spoke to me, before they heard a word out of my mouth, they didn't know whether I spoke English or French. They knew nothing about me, just saw me on the street. And I've said and then even in close quarters, as I've been involved in various community levels of community organization, have found too that people always start with, where are you from? Because the assumption is I'm not from here. And so before anything, like right after hello, where are you from? What is it about me when you look at me that makes you think I would not be from here? I happen not to be, but my daughter, who was born at the Gatineau Hospital, gets the same question.
Right.
So it's I think the official definition, the hairs that they're trying to split, are a very thin veil of othering and exclusion, and making sure that all those who don't fall into that category that we were introduced to before we even stepped foot in this country, Québécois de souche, trying to, what was the other one? Pure laine.
Yes, pure laine. Yes.
What color is wool?
Great question.
Actually, it's
the last time
it's quite dirty before you wash it.
Yeah.
So one assumes there, but no, I don't. Who is a Quebecois, a Quebecer? Anybody but me.
Okay, very good. Now, a lot of these questions are purposely very general, and there's sometimes, based on your answers, going to seem repetitive because you probably already answered them in the other questions, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And sometimes when you phrase a question in a different way, as I'm sure you well know, you can get a different answer or a different perspective. So the next question is, has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
No, I never felt like I belonged, and I still don't. It's not. I'm accepted in certain households in the context of specific relationships.
Right.
And that has never changed. That was always the case. from the first moment we landed here.
Well, that leads me to the next question, which you have mostly already answered, but what are some of the most difficult things about living in Quebec?
Actually, I think it's I think it is the psychological and the spiritual violence. I think, as I said, I grew up 20 minutes down the road from the former national headquarters of the KKK. And I have lived in 5 countries and a Caribbean island, in addition to my home country. And I can honestly say I have never been aggressed more by white men in public any place else that I've lived on the face of the earth.
That's a very strong statement, and it almost shocks me actually to hear that, but I have heard this experience before, very rarely, but hearing it from you right at this moment, I've got to say my reaction is shock. I shouldn't be, but I am.
And every white man I've ever said it to has been shocked. So no, and the ones who think of them as very nice men and who think of themselves as very nice men and you know, have said to me, you know, but I'm not a racist, Letitia. What I've said is Canadians don't, you know, that's the other thing, you know, the constant, aren't you grateful to be here? Well, I didn't come from a dysregulated country until recently. It's become dysregulated since I've been here. But so, you know, I'm not escaping hunger or war or whatever it is. So that's first. And second, I've had some pretty the consequences of the exclusion and of the liberty that members of the majority culture feel to be violent have impacted my health, have you know, affected where or if I feel safe. So I feel like I have to armor up. I have to steel both my spirit and my mind every time I step out the door of my household, because there are pimple-faced and adolescents who feel completely within their right to be disrespectful and to be surly and you know, just out of pocket, you know, behave in ways that I would never tolerate my children behaving. And they can do that towards me. And so I've said Canadians don't hang Black people from trees, but spirit murder has been raised to an exquisite art form. And from what I can tell, there is unself-conscious pleasure taken in it.
Strong one. Wow.
So that's one of the hardest things, to decide when I'm going to defend my humanity or let it ride. So that's a constant mental, I think there's a mental and emotional tax that's exacted. And I've witnessed it and been on the receiving end of it outside of Quebec, also because we're right across the river from Ottawa. But as with most things, it's like, you know, In Quebec, just multiply it by 10 or 100 times, and you you have the general Canadian experience. But it's yeah, I think gathering, developing adequate coping skills and gathering the internal fortitude and faith in humanity to be able to engage. And I think the places where it comes from, sort of the unself-consciousness and the cognitive dissonance, just, you just have to do the rational calculation every time. Do I engage? Do I explain it? Do I teach? Or do I just, like, step over it and keep it moving? Kind of like, Michaela Jean is my role model, because I don't know if you remember this moment, it was one in November, the Veterans Day, and she was reviewing the troops as the Governor General, and there were some veterans from the Second World War, I think, and she was shaking their hand, going down the line and shaking everyone's hand. And one of the older gentlemen refused to shake her hand.
Really?
Yes, it was caught. It was caught on film, and she just moved on to the next person and so forth. Afterwards, she was asked about it. How did that make you feel when that older gentleman, that veteran, refused to shake your hand? And in the most elegant way, and you remember her face, she just turned and smiled and said, "Oh, did he? I didn't notice."
Wow.
So I try to make that rational calculation. Am I going to give the Michael Jean response, or am I going to engage? So,
Yeah,
but I found her very elegant.
absolutely. In a strange way, that's an interesting segue into the next two questions. In recent years, Quebec's Francophone majority has identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats to them. Which of these concerns, if any, do you share and support? And which of these concerns make you feel excluded or targeted?
Well, I think you've done very well to pose the question in a very neutral way. But I guess I would say Quebec's political majority, and actually you can't even say it's a majority, because the governments get elected these days by 30%, 35%.
You
So
are
that's
right.
not a majority. But I think they've manufactured some concerns. So I've paid attention to different scholars and researchers and so forth who are looking at the same statistics, perhaps more comprehensive, taking a more comprehensive view of the statistics, and said, this is absolutely a fabrication. That the French language is under threat is an invention, kind of like race. And racism is real, but race is a manufactured social construct. So really, I guess in the way they count is a student who was born and raised in a French household, goes to college and or cégep and learns English, they're no longer counted as a francophone. So if that's the way you're doing your counting, and then you want to make policy based on that interpretation of the data, I would have to say I can't identify with any legitimate concerns. What I think is regrettable is that it really seems like there's a zero-sum game that is being played, and it's being set up to be a zero-sum game where it doesn't have to be, so that if you're bilingual francophone, it's like you're a traitor. If you give any, and this is what my husband and I, we felt like, oh my goodness, like where are we? We feel like we're caught between, two warring factions, and we're being used as pawns. Our experience, our life, and we came here with such enthusiasm and such great hope that it was gonna, this is a place that reflects our family much more than Indiana. My husband was not even understood when he's explained, when he spoke in English because of his accent. So we were like, oh, here, this is gonna really, this is gonna reflect our family. We're gonna fit right in here. And so I think the shock and the disappointment of the games, the gamesmanship, I think has been uh, really off-putting, and not to, put too fine a point on it, but having, done my studies in international human rights, and, you know, I speak French. I learned French in Switzerland. I got compliments on my French when I first came here. But uh, I I've been, it's as if um, uh, the socioeconomic and political structures set up are trying to alienate me as someone who's enthusiastic about, who was enthusiastic coming here, and who had made the effort to learn French, to understand the at least where I was in the UN, there was a clear economic benefit to learning French. A lot of our work was done in English, but we lived in a French-speaking part of the country, and everywhere I've been, whether it's Italy or Germany or Puerto Rico, I've tried to learn the language, because it's part of, and where I come from, even in Indiana, you can't graduate from high school without at least 2 years of foreign language, because it's understood that it is a reflection. It is that kind of linguistic training is a sign of intelligence.
Mhm.
So to come here to a place where it's seen as a betrayal if you speak the other official language of the country was completely unexpected and perplexing and wildly disappointing. It still is. But I understand that everyday people are being manipulated around political ideologues, objectives and agendas.
Mhm.
And it's most it's really disappointing, and it does, I feel like I'm being dared, to hate French. And I'm like, why is that even a question? Like, that just doesn't even make sense.
Mhm.
It's very, it's a strange thing. And I keep thinking, like, if you wouldn't have to, like, kind of manipulate people or put pressure on people, or create these illusions of oppression, if everyone understood that, understood French, being part of a French speaking you might want to call it minority in North America, means you're unique. And if there's one thing that I know my countrymen like, it's uniqueness. So you can, that is, you know, that can be a real benefit. My husband said that in the UN system, in Geneva, the highest paid translators, some of the most, you know, sought after translators between English and French are from Quebec. So this is, you know, if you understand that what you have to offer to the country, to the region, to internationally, is you know, of sought after value, then you can see yourself differently.
Mhm.
But the feigned, you know, oppression is just, it's generating, you know, not just ideology, but actual policy and effects on people's lives that are extremely destructive. And so I can honestly say, and I hadn't put the two together, but when I was an intern at the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in law school, I went to one of the meetings of the subcommittee on the elimination of racial discrimination, and they, you know, they go country by country and case by case, and Canada's name was called as, you know, oppressing, you know, being a human rights abuser. By the way, that was, you know, you were sharing company with, keeping company with Guatemala at the height of this shining path unpleasantry, and apartheid South Africa. You're on the same list. And my head snapped up because in law school, we were told that Canada, unlike the United States, had signed on to, you know, both parts of the, you know, human rights regimes, and, you know, had these human rights commissions, and, you know, they were, it was the gold standard in North America, and so on and so forth. So I'm in this meeting and they call Canada's name, and my head snaps up. I'm like, what's going on in up in Canada? What's happening? And they were on the list because this is right after Bill 101. They were on the list because of the way Quebec treats the children of immigrants in its education system. And so I come here to live, and I'm pregnant, I'm having kids. I'm like, uh-oh. You know, and, you know, you run into this, and you're like, but what is, you know, what's the bottom line? Like, why do you feel a need to have to coerce people into learning a language? Because no one had to coerce me. As a matter of fact, I begged to go to take French classes when I was in Geneva, because I knew it meant job security and I would have access to more employment opportunity. Plus, it just made it more pleasant to live in a Francophone country. And we were right, or part of the country, and we were right next to the border with Ferney-Voltaire, France, which was, you know, the best place to shop and eat. So, like, you know, there was no obstacle or hindrance. I had to persuade my employer, to my manager, you know, to let me take classes during, because you, as an employee in the UN, you got free language training.
Mhm.
So when I first went, I was on a really short-term contract, and I had to pay to take French classes in the city. And after I'd been there for 6 months, I was allowed to take in-house training. And so I was like, why would I not want to learn You know, it was I lived in a French speaking area of the world, and I wanted to learn it for my job. So you don't have to, like, people don't come here thinking, you know, I'm going to land in Quebec and do my best not to speak French. Nobody does that. You know, but if you get dissuaded once you get here and you're beat over the head with various, you know, othering experiences, and various obstacles, uh, it's it's a challenge. It becomes a real challenge. So yeah, I guess I don't know if I've answered your question.
No,
Um,
you have, and that again, you give me great segues into questions, because the next one you've also probably answered, but I'm going to look for a more direct answer because it's a very direct question. What is the biggest problem facing Quebec, and how could it be resolved? You've alluded to it in your answers to the other questions, but I'm specifically looking for what you feel is the biggest problem facing Quebec society today. And in your mind, how could that be resolved?
I think it's the embracing of um, the ideology, political and social ideology that is leading to the balkanization of Quebec. And so, as I said, based on my experience in the international human rights sphere, I can clearly see there is a program of slow motion ethnic cleansing that is going on in Quebec, being led by political and social elites. And given Canada's experience in Yugoslavia, which, by the way, doesn't exist anymore,
Mhm.
one would think that folks would be a lot more savvy to what is going to those parallels,
Mhm.
the laws that are being put in place, the justifications that are being made. Apparently, you know, we're not allowed to make references to Nazi Germany because then you lose your credibility. So I won't. I'll refer to Yugoslavia, which no longer exists. And I heard just the other day from a friend of mine who said they were in Montreal somewhere and had called a plumber who happened to be, I don't know, Serbian or Croatian, I can't remember, but said, this is how it started in my country, in Yugoslavia. This is how it started. This kind of speech, political speech, and this kind of whipping up fears and these kind of laws, passing these kind of laws, are exactly how it started. And I think how it can be resolved is some the truth telling needs to get more pointed and more specific. I think making those understanding, just like, you know, I've said, roll the tapes, just roll the tapes and do the translation of political leaders in these countries at these different points in history, and then compare it with the political speech that you see coming out of the current government. And then if you want to tell yourself, oh, no, it can't happen here, do more of these interviews, and you will understand that it's happening, it's having the effect the desired effect of alienating people from Quebec and who come here in good faith, wanting to make a contribution and wanting to make a life. I think we have to tell ourselves the truth that there is nothing special or exclusive about Quebec that guarantees that it will not, or Canada, that guarantees it will not follow these same historical paths. And the killing has already started in Quebec City with the mosque. It's not, it isn't, it's a logical consequence of the misleading of Quebec people.
Wow. Okay, the next question, I don't know if you have the questions in front of you there, but this is, I asked this based on my filming background, because it's an interesting tool, and it compels, in my experience visually, the viewer. I ask the question and ask for a show of fingers. So what I typically do, I'll ask this question, and then I'll have a show of fingers by, say, 10 people in a row. And it's a very visually strong way to convey a message. So I'm going to ask you to do the same, if you don't mind. On a scale from 1 to 10, indicate by a show of fingers, how strongly do you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges?
I'm afraid you won't be able to use me in your defilage of fingers because I don't have any to give you.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I did not know that.
I mean, I don't have any fingers to show you.
Oh,
that it would have to be
metaphorically. I misunderstood you. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, I don't mean it that way. I mean, I physically have fingers,
Yeah.
but you don't have the number that I would use on the scale.
Fair enough.
If the way the question is worded in terms of joy, how strongly do I feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges, presumes that I feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges, and I don't.
Okay. Well, you made this sign. That's good enough.
Yep.
That was brilliant, in fact. Thank you. Okay, so to wrap this up officially, is there anything else that you would like to say about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec?
No, I don't think so. Just I wish that our dreams of making a life and growing a family here had been able to be realized. But I think I spent the first 5 years or so here in a state of revindication, like just, I think, shock and denial, and not wanting to accept that we've made this major life decision and commitment. And I left a job that I loved in Switzerland, and a dream of living and working abroad. And I think I've spent a lot of time in a place of regret for my choices. But here recently, after experiencing some health challenges, I've decided that if this is where we are, and we're going to be, then I have to get to work to make it better for my children, even if they don't feel like this is, you know, a place they want to stay in and to live. And I make room for the possibility that, you know, outside of Quebec, there are experiences of francophones that might parallel some of mine here inside Quebec. And so I guess I feel like everyone can do better. It's not a zero-sum game. Everybody can and must do better in a country that has said that, you know, it's going to have 2 official languages. There and I find that even that is exclusive or exclusionary and a, you know, kind of a colonialist extension, because it erases Indigenous peoples. But if this is the commitment of the majority culture, then at least do that. At least do that. So whether it's, you know, a francophone living in BC or Nova Scotia or a anglophone living here in Quebec, my way of I've felt like I've had to sort of establish my own identity in between the two. You know that book, The Two Solitudes? Well, there's a third, and it's for those of us, you know, in the middle between the two competing linguistic factions, and it is quite solitary. But we, you know, my approach has been that, or my firm belief is that everyone should be able to speak in their native language and be understood. So when it comes to especially medical and financial affairs, I want to speak in English so that I'm sure about what I said. There are some ways that, you know, and the stacking of verbs in French is very challenging. And so I don't want to find myself in those particular two contexts, having used the wrong verb tense or in the wrong order, and what I'm understood to have said is not what I meant to say. So for clarity, I think in those two areas, and in dealing with the government, any level of government, from municipal to federal government, I should be able to speak in my mother tongue, and the people with whom I'm speaking should also be able to speak in their mother tongue. And all of us should be understood and accepted like good Canadians.
Well, I want to thank you for one of the most compelling and engaging interviews I've yet to do. Your experience is not unique, unfortunately, but your perspective is unique. And I truly thank you for this. I am personally feel almost overwhelmed with what you've said, and your contribution to this project is not going to be forgotten and will certainly be a great part of it. And I thank you very, very much for your time. You've been most gracious and most engaging and most compelling. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So I'm
Thanks for asking me to participate.
I'm turning this off now.